So today I'm very excited to offer up our webinar with you in conjunction with Baxter Planning and Palo Alto Networks. Today we're going to cover fortifying global spare parts management with dynamic planning to drive growth. So a few housekeeping things, as you are all very familiar with Zoom and webinars these days and virtual meetings, most of it you guys are very familiar with. But to ensure quality experience, we've put all of our guests on mute, but you will have the opportunity to unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question at any time. We're going to do our best to answer as many questions as possible, but just know that we're going to probably be able to get to 1 or 2 questions per slide, probably about a cumulative of 10 questions answered live today. We will absolutely follow up with any questions that you guys type into the Q&A function here. Personally, we'll route them to the company that's best suited to answer them. So just know we take this very seriously, and we're interested in following up with you on that. Of course, you'll receive a recording of this webinar as well as the material presented in an email shortly after the webinar is finished, so you can look forward to that. And then this webinar is intended for informational use only. Each business is unique, and so are the solutions. So it's important to understand that we're going to be taking a closer look at Palo Alto Networks today, as well as what was done with Baxter Planning and Flash. But every situation, every business is different. So process them on your own, but of course work with your teams internally to figure out the best solutions. So our agenda today, we're going to go through a little introduction and overview of who the panelists are and the companies that they're coming from, taking a little closer look at planning as a service from Baxter's perspective, a little bit about Palo, and of course a little bit about Flash, diving deeper into communications, really how this was one of the most pivotal parts of getting through COVID and what's going to transpire afterwards. Of course, moving forward, looking at how you balance resiliency with cost management, planning for really this, what I like to call is life 10.0, right? A lot of things have changed. What are we doing about that? And then how does it all come together? And then know that this is part of a series that we'll be doing alongside Baxter with other customers as well, to really understand a broader stretch of solutions and things that were brought to the table. Because again, for all of you on the call and here, we're all figuring this out together. So we're excited to bring you a series that might last throughout the rest of the year. So be on the lookout for that. And then lastly, looking at how all of us are connected. So I'm going to move over here a little bit, but we're all connected from the 3 companies' perspectives in that. So Palo Alto Networks uses Baxter Planning for spare parts planning, things like that. And they also use Flash Global for their... Oh, I guess we don't have auto mute, but I guess we'll get there. Kate, can you help us with that? Thank you. And then using Flash for global supply chain implementations and management and things like that. So really it's a neat look at an ecosystem from 3 very dynamic companies and how it all comes together to create a solution. So my name is Ryan Miller. I'm the Vice President of Marketing with Flash Global. Flash is a service supply chain company with 700 plus locations around the world. We specialize in mission-critical delivery of spare parts. In addition to that, we have a robust trade compliance operation that really enables our customers to be able to move products in and out of countries very expeditiously. So that's a little bit about me. Mark, good morning.
Good morning. I'm Mark Eisenberg. I'm the Vice President of Client Services for Flash Global. I'm domiciled in the Boston, Massachusetts area, and I have responsibility for our global account team supporting customers such as Palo Alto. Philip?
Great, thanks Mark. So Philip Kennedy, Chief Marketing Officer and EVP of Sales at Baxter Planning. A little bit about Baxter. We're a supply chain planning software company focused on addressing the unique challenges associated with the service supply chain. So not manufacturing, not finished goods, service parts planning is all that we do. We've been supporting customers in this market for over 27 years, and that's allowed us to develop deep functionality and expertise to address those challenges. We help companies in diverse sectors, including technology, healthcare, and industrial markets that have one thing in common: keeping mission critical parts available for their customers and field service organizations. Mission critical is the word you just heard Mark and Ryan talk about. We share several customers with Flash, one of which being Palo Alto, like was mentioned earlier, and we're excited to be part of the discussion today. John?
Thanks, Philip. Hello, everyone. John Peterson here. I've been working in supply chain roles since the Reagan administration with a focus on service parts planning for about the past 25 years. The last 19 years, I've been with Baxter Planning. In that time, I've run implementations, customer support, planning, really everything that touches a customer or potential customer. Currently, I spend most of my time supporting supply chain leaders who are evaluating our planning solution with ROI analysis and proof of concept activity. Jonathan?
Hi, my name is Jonathan Morgan. I run the planning team and our supply chain operations team at Palo Alto Networks. That means I'm covering demand, spares, inventory, and spares parts planning. Palo Alto Networks, if you're not familiar with us, we're a global security leader. We deliver an integrated platform and have a ecosystem of partners doing analytics, logistics, so on. And we really are protecting over 70,000 customers, $3 billion in revenue and across 150 countries. And we have a vision of making each day safer and more secure than the one before. So our focus is really making sure our customers always have parts in the right place at the right time. And that's really how we fit into this discussion today. So looking forward to some questions and comments. Brian?
Hi, I'm Brian Hayes. I manage the service logistics and repair operations for Palo Alto Networks. We've been partnered, I guess, with Flash now going on probably the end of this year would be around 11 years, I believe. They've been a great partner of ours over that span. Looking forward to the discussion today, and let's get going.
Let's jump in. So, team, let's talk about communications. So what role did communications play in transforming actionable data into sound business strategies? Mark from Flash, would you take us away, please? Hopefully that mute button didn't jump on itself.
Apologize for that. So communications was clearly the biggest challenge, and I'll say our biggest success throughout the COVID situation, right? So we have eyes and feet on the ground around the world, and we relied on them to give us meaningful, up-to-date information as to what was going on in each country, each region, how are our FSLs operating, were they operating, what were the transportation carriers doing, were we able to move product around the world, locally, what have you. As many of you know, there were a lot of local restrictions based on government requirements, requiring a lot of legal documentation. And it was a challenging environment, but we were really well prepared for it. We do, the uncommon almost every day. We're always prepared for the what if or what could go wrong. Probably not to this extent, but I think we did a really, really good job with it. In terms of our customer base, we had very strong consultative dialogues with each and every customer, illustrating some of the challenges that we're seeing, what help do they need. With a network of 700 plus locations, we were able to move product around and open up facilities for our customers so they can get closer to the end user, whereas perhaps in other areas of the world, they were relying more on the regional approach. So that communication went on daily. We provided a communication update each and every day to our customers via email. And our customers really, really appreciated it. And we continue to do that, maybe not as frequently, but we're very proud of that. And that effort goes on. And I would, again, stress to everybody that without the communication that we had with our partners and without our customers, we would have really been in a world of hurt.
Thank you, Mark. Brian from Palo Alto Networks, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I would just say well done by Flash. I think getting almost real-time updates on a daily basis from them, having their feet on the ground was a huge advantage for us to know where the customs issues were, where the shelter-in-place issues were, so we could do some adjustments around the globe and how many parts we were putting into the depot network. We unique situation, obviously, but we took that information. We compiled the list of all of our depot locations around the world, put in a red, yellow, green type of status that was out on the internet. We were fielding questions on a daily basis from account teams, support organizations. We had the ability with that, taking that information, putting it out on our internet, so it was real time for them to go and look and see where things might be delayed. Like Mark said, it was invaluable for them to give it to us, provide it on a daily basis. The communication was just outstanding.
Excellent, thank you. Jonathan.
Yeah, so to add on to Brian's comments, where I agreed that the info from Flash was extremely valuable. We've been fortunate enough to be working with Baxter for over 6 years now, and I think about 5 years of that we've been using the planning as a service offering. And since that was established, it really gave us a leg up where we already had existing communication channels, reporting and activities, ongoing, so that as we were getting information in and as we were having discussions internally, we had activity happening almost real time back into Baxter as needed. We didn't have to do a lot of massive changes, honestly. We were able to keep things rolling pretty much as standard as far as like lead times and whatnot. And we did some things outside of it, but the communication part of it, having an existing planner in the Baxter seat was really helpful to help give us like information as to if we had questions around what we should be doing to modify system parameters, how quickly we could get those done, and what the impact would be. That was massively helpful.
That's great, thank you. Philip from Baxter Planning.
Yeah, I would echo Jonathan's comments. When we talk about communication, it's easy to think of a change or increase in communication because of the planning as a service deployment model. We're really part of the Palo Alto team, so a change in communication I wouldn't describe as a success factor. What I would say is how we help them with effective communication and the words actionable data that are up on the screen. So the planning analytics that they have access to are enabled by their planning systems integration with Flash and other IT infrastructure to maintain that up-to-date view of their global supply chain in a single system. So that daily visibility to changes at every site, that's happened practically real time. It's not something that's just a weekly update, spread across multiple systems. And when we think about planning activity, it wasn't a hunch. I think demand is falling in Spain more so than Germany, and using a spreadsheet to figure that out. Alerts and forecast adjustments were being done automatically by the system, so it let them be more focused on strategic decisions, ones that really require human intuition. They're going to talk about how they consolidated defective inventory. That's not something that a planning system is going to automatically figure out. That's something that they were looking ahead and identifying strategic changes that they needed to make. And we're excited to be part of enabling them to do that. So it's I'd wager that everyone attending has used a spreadsheet to plan millions of inventory or across hundreds of sites at some point. And if you're not doing it now, you did it in the past, and it's tough to be successful down in tactical planning decisions on a day-to-day basis and be strategic at the same time, especially when you're in a crisis mode, like we were facing with COVID-19 right at the onset.
Good, thank you. So I will pause here to see if there's any questions for our panelists. Okay, great. So we'll move right along. Oops. Okay, great. So what planning challenges did you see related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and how were those addressed? So Brian from Palo Alto Networks, could you take us into this a little bit?
So some of the challenges that we saw, and I think Jonathan's going to talk about this a little bit later, but obviously the lead times getting into countries had changed. Some of the customs officials either shutting down altogether, working with less manpower, shorter shifts, depots working shorter shifts, less manpower. A lot of what that translated into, Jonathan will go into a lot more detail on this, but we looked a lot at as our back-end repair world and what was going on there. We also had challenges with our repair site because they too were affected by COVID. They were forced to be out of the office, less manpower, less hours at work, and so we concentrated a lot more on looking at our demand and what our demand was, and repairing items that were more critical, what our high demand runners were, versus repairing things into just kind of that we typically would do on a first in, first out basis type of thing. So that definitely changed our approach to how we plan and how we move parts around the world. So that's how it affected us pretty much. Those are the challenges we had to overcome.
Jonathan, anything to support or add to that?
Yeah, and even tying it back to the previous slide. So all the information that we had from Baxter on, that Phil mentioned, the daily views of by site, by SKU, what's happening. We were able to pull that, and well, we couldn't do it all within Baxter, but we pulled that data out of Baxter and added it into a Google file that we then added in all the daily information we were getting from Flash on the logistics side of things for each depot, each country, and merged those together. And I had one of my analysts build out some back-end reporting that we could refresh this, pull in essentially a view of daily on hand at our DCs, at our depot stocks, what was happening, see where we had the logistics challenges, where we need to put a little more focus with Brian's team, and then identify based on what we had in our overall supply chain and abilities, because obviously the spares parts is just the one part of it. We had challenges in our forward supply chain as well for revenue customers. We tied all that together, gave us visibility on where we need to focus, so we weren't just chasing, trying to boil the ocean, as they say. We met with Brian's team, the repair team, decided on where we need to place overtime, which SKUs we would maybe not normally repair that we would repair because it's a cost benefit sort of analysis. We made choices there. We definitely had regular priority lists going out to the repair team, which they probably saw a lot of churn from us, but as things were changing, as we got updates from the full supply chain, that could change our direction. So we were really making sure they weren't spending time on things that we didn't need anymore, at least in the near term. And we also were able to give them like a longer range forecast as we move forward and as things started opening up again, planning for which depots were going to need extra stock based on what they hadn't been able to get. So the RMAs wouldn't maybe have been happening, so the forecast could come down. We know that's maybe a blip and then it'll start spiking up. So it helped us plan all those sorts of things and communicate across the teams to avoid some of the challenges. So at the end of the day, our service levels really stayed very high because we had all this data and communication established.
So Baxter, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, Ryan. So John here. I'd say it's really what we've seen has been across the board, everything you can think of, from reduced demand to increased demand, depending on the products and the markets that our different customers are in. We have one customer, for example, that's kind of associated with the travel industry, and we saw a 40% decrease in demand kind of right off the bat, and that's expected to last 2 to 3 years. But of course, there have even been situations where there's been minimum impact or no impact. What we did is internally we formed an interdepartmental task force to try to get out in front of the issues for our customers. We anticipated potential disruption across demand, supply, and network design, the necessity to open and close stocking locations. We focused on 2 key areas: proactive monitoring and investigation to identify current anomalies, as well as preemptive planning practices and brainstorming potential long-range impacts. And how we could deal with those. In one case, we were able to reduce target stock levels for a customer in Europe alone by 20%, preventing a lot of excess accumulation. We had to monitor and update replenishment sourcing rules in the EU as border crossing restrictions changed. We've had to assist in pulling good inventory back to hub locations to make sure it's more flexible and available for newly reprioritized replenishments. So it's all over the place. So really, even though there's a lot of commonality that we can learn from, the reality is each situation is a little bit unique.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was just going to add quickly, just reinforcing this is, Ryan shared it at the beginning. Every situation is different, so can't reinforce that enough. But what I'll add is, from a technology perspective, calculating a better forecast in this environment is not what a planning solution is going to give you. It's hard, but what it can do is give you agility. So that's the value that you get from automating planning processes in an environment where like this. So there's an example where, EU border restrictions are changing. So that changes how replenishment can be accomplished. So it's a lot easier to do that in an environment where you're updating a system configuration instead of trying to change human behavior and habit. If it's a person that's been doing that replenishment manually, all of a sudden on Tuesday morning, they can't do that anymore. So it's just easier to manage inside of a system, and especially in a time-sensitive environment like we were in.
So I want to tap Kate, who's monitoring our questions, and we've got one I'd like to put before the team here.
Hi guys, we have a question from Mike R. He says, are we going to get into basic functionality of the tool, KPIs, ROI?
Well, I was going to say I can handle that one. So we're not going to be doing a whole lot of that today. So one of the things that we're working on is putting together a little deeper understanding of the tools and things like that to help you guys get a better understanding of utilization. But today we're looking at a very kind of high level of the infrastructure and how it all came together. So Mike R., stay tuned for much more of that. But I think it's good to bring up, I actually meant to bring it up earlier because we do want to get into a little bit deeper of it. There's many of you on the call who can dive a little deeper, know some of the basics. Today we're setting the stage about kind of how it all came together in this COVID situation to really help, in this case, Palo Alto Networks to be even more resilient, right? So some of the big takeaways I'm looking at from the conversations is, there was a lot of things already established, right? So we had planning in place. We had global locations and infrastructure set up to move parts. We had, Palo Alto Networks with a great deal of focus on SLA attainment. So a lot of it was sort of in place, but then it's refining, right? It's the tweaking, it's the increase in communication amongst the three of us, and of course the thousands of people it took to pull this together. So that's one of the most interesting things for me is hearing all this.
Right,
so I'm
gonna one more question.
Sure, Kate, go ahead.
Sorry. This is from Axel. From a leadership perspective, how have you ensured your team stayed productive during COVID-19? Good question.
That's a great one. If you don't mind, Baxter, either Philip or John, I'd like to start with you guys, if you'd like to.
Yeah, no, for us, sure. We got, metrics that we had put in place before COVID broke to monitor the performance of the team. So we had good visibility to what is the baseline on productivity. And it was interesting. What we saw was a slight dip when we moved to a work from home environment. People had to manage that transition, but we're not talking about, a month of a dip. We're talking about less than a week where productivity dropped lightly. And what we actually saw was a higher level of productivity once everybody got home. And I think we were able to achieve that because 25% of our employees work remote anyway. So organizationally, we were prepared for that. But the way to enforce it is, kind of going back to the first topic that we discussed, communication. You don't have the benefit of seeing people in the office all the time, at least not in our case. So the one-on-ones, being on Slack, using Zoom and turning on the video so you can see people and what's actually going on, those are all little things that you've got to do. It's not a technology thing, it's technology enabled, but at the end of the day, it's a human thing when it comes to leadership is what I would say.
So I'm going to go ahead and pause the answers on that one. Just want to make sure we get through some of the material. But again, that's a question, we probably put together a little bit more detail for you because we actually have a lot of insight there, both from the Flash perspective and Palo Alto Networks. So that's great. Thank you so much for the questions and the input there. So I'm going to advance the slide here. Hopefully it works. I've been having some sticky. So we're going to flash up a poll question here. So you guys, done these before, just so you know, they are anonymous. We will not know who you are. So Kate, would you mind rolling that? We'll give you guys, 15, 20 seconds here. Let me read it for you guys. Are you considering changes to your investments to strengthen your spare parts planning and delivery strategies? Choose one. Answers are coming in nicely. Okay, great. So for the majority, or I should say the overwhelming winner here is yes. The majority of you guys are considering changing your investment. So we'd like to go into a little bit in talking about that, some of the things that we've looked at as a team here. So thank you for your input on the poll there. So our next big question, how is balancing supply chain resiliency with costs changed over the past 120 days? So Brian from Palo Alto Networks, take us away, please.
Yeah, so I don't want to say cost doesn't matter because of course it does, but we put at Palo Alto Networks, we put a very high premium on our customer service levels and meeting SLAs. We measure ourselves at 99.5% for on-time delivery. And a lot of the ways that we accomplish that is taking a lot of the data that comes out of FlashTrack itself, whether it's on-hand quantities, what are those parts that are in stock, where's the demand coming from, how often is it coming from, how hard is it what's the lead times to get into those countries, what's your asset recovery rates to get things back into repair, what's your repair turnaround time, driving all of that so you can fulfill the depots and meet the SLAs that you're trying to hit, whether it be next business day, 4 hour, 2 hour. But taking all of that data and trying to do that manually on spreadsheets and watching demand that goes up, down, sideways, it's very difficult to do on spreadsheets, right? So leveraging the Flash data with what Baxter provides to us, you have that data at your fingertips where you can make decisions on the fly. Measuring all those data points are keys to actually helping you drive costs down or your cost investment down. But again, spreadsheets versus system output, huge difference that will go a long way for you to drive your cost investment down, not over just the past 120 days, but looking forward out into the future as well.
Yeah, and a lot of it, the ground was more or less broken in the past 120 days. Now we have the opportunity to rebuild it in a much more resilient way, right? So a lot of our attendees today, we have questions. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think we were in a really good place already with Jonathan building the relationship with Baxter, our relationship with you guys. Again, gelling those two things together put us well ahead of the curve to be able to meet these challenges. So again, manually versus system, there's just no contest.
Absolutely. Jonathan, supporting points on that.
Yeah, so we're set up a little bit differently than some organizations where my team actually has all of the planning. So earlier, I've got demand, spares, inventory, supply. So that ability to actually see those quickly and not have to go off and pull in other teams and decide where to make bets. I was able to actually, make those decisions myself because I had all sides of it. That visibility of knowing, okay, well, what's our forward-looking supply chain looking like? What's the reverse looking like? And being able to feed that into the conversations with Brian and the repair team on how to make those decisions was huge. So I kind of talked about this, I guess, in the last comments, but that was a very visible or very useful and important way to look at things so that we could maintain our high customer satisfaction and help to prioritize inventory based on what deals were coming in on the front end for, as we neared our end of quarter, as well as what RMAs were looking like and what country stocking looked like process. And within that, we still maintained a view of, what we kind of measure our logistics costs, service logistics costs. So we still keep track of that. It just doesn't become our top KPI. In this case, we really make the service level is the top. We did invest more internal efforts and time to, like I said, build some of that reporting in Google to tie the two sides together. So we definitely made some investments there, at least in the short term. And that actually highlighted some things that we want to do ongoing to help optimize things and bridge the gap. So we have more reporting that identifies where we need to focus. And Baxter does a lot of that for us already. So it gives us some other information to tie together now.
That's interesting. So John, from Baxter Planning, you had a couple thoughts, kind of related around this too.
Yeah, our focus is always on balancing inventory costs with service levels. And some customers will have a bias towards one of those or another. Palo Alto Networks clearly has a bias towards higher service level. A reprioritization of which parts should be repaired, which Jonathan and Brian really got prepared for and got out ahead of, that can change dynamically based on changes in demand and changes in failure rates and inventory balances and the availability of the defective material. All these different things, come into the equation. So I think the moral of the story is you really have to be able to manage all of that's going on in this very fluid situation without ever really taking your eye off of inventory cost and service level, because those things can start to go awry pretty quickly if you do.
Definitely. So I also wanted to look at, so from Mark, from your perspective, there are a lot of people on the call who have this question, right? It's an interesting balance, knowing what we went through with COVID and kind of knowing we have to take some of those lessons learned, right? We can't just assume that this is just going to disappear tomorrow. And how do we use that to evolve into the future? But what are some of the things that you and the team look at from this perspective?
So, you hit on something about, looking back and looking forward. One of the things that we did realize, and I think everybody did, but we think about it frequently, is the fact that the pandemic moved east to west. So, as we were experiencing all these challenges and all these changes, we were seeing it first further east, and it was moving through Europe and then eventually into North America. There were kind of many lessons learned along the way. And, one of the things that we worked with customers was they had issues where they didn't have enough product close to the destination or closer to the region. So we saw customers building inventories in our global service centers or DCs, so that helped prepare them to move product more quickly than if it was just a US-based distribution center. But beyond that, we have this network of 700 plus FSLs around the world. And so now we afforded the opportunity for customers to say, what, I don't want to go with a regional distribution. I need to get closer. I need to be in the area proper if I can. And we were able to, throughout this pandemic, with our customers and with our internal operations teams, ensure that we could get product into our FSLs and have them up and running, in some cases, in less than a week, depending on where it was. And that was an activity, candidly, as the pandemic started. We really didn't anticipate that occurring early on. We thought it would be more of a later phase, if you will, or when the pandemic would settle. But in the 3+ months that we've been surviving through the pandemic, if you will, we have never seen so much activity in opening FSLs for customers all over the world at a moment's notice. Help me, help me, help me. What can I expect to get product through, and how am I going to do that? And we were able to help customers with that. And really, it's the power of the network that gave our customers, including Pan, and certainly Baxter has visibility to our locations, to plan for that and to execute and to, hopefully prevent, a lengthy outage for any particular customer. And we continue to see that ask for more and more locations. And it was something, I'll call it a byproduct of the pandemic, but we're very proud of that.
So just checking in, are there any questions on this one coming into our Q&A or anything that you'd like to be asked live? Okay, very good. So kind of taking a look at this, and Kate, interrupt at any time. I do see a few coming in, so we'll see if they need to come through here. But really that trifecta, right, the spare parts planning in order to help sort of understand, or I should say in conjunction with the locations, right, specifically located closer to install bases, right? So you've got the planning part of it on the specific parts, and then the location, and then really molding that all together to ensure that you do have that resiliency, but you're also optimizing the cost to find that balance. So, I mean, personally, I'm very interested to see how this continues to evolve. I mean, right now we're in micro-evolution sprints, right? So we've got weeks and months and so on and so forth. So very interesting. Okay, anything else before we move on here, gentlemen, or questions?
There is one question that just came in.
Very good.
How do you address or improve visibility into up and downstream supply chains, including vendor and customer inventories and lead times, in order to improve planning and spare parts availability?
Palo Alto Networks, would you guys like to take a swing at that one?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. And I think for me anyway, and for our situation, it comes into that we have all the planning in one organization. So we have, real-time dashboards, not real-time, but at least daily refreshes of dashboards based on the forward-looking logistics, what's happening in our sales pipeline. We actually had weekly sessions with up to our SVP over the last quarter, and still ongoing now, actually, to talk about forward supply chain and any gaps. And then that let me understand what our constraints would be, as we talked about the reverse supply chain and depot coverage with Brian's team. And that led us to decisions on, should we make the decision to repair a very low cost item that usually doesn't get repaired because we don't have new supply coming in, so we can't just backfill it. We have to go spend a little extra money and repair and put those back into inventory. We also had deeper discussions with our quality teams to make sure that any SKUs that we wanted to pull back for refurbishment, repair, as there's, obviously ECOs and, regular business happening behind the scenes, engineering change orders are coming out, revisions are going towards end of life, software changes. We had to review all those things to make sure that the inventory we're leveraging was still good for the customers, and we weren't going to have any impact in the field and create other issues. So we had to balance all of that. And the data from Baxter, having Baxter really in the background, doing the day-to-day tasks of placing orders where it saw the need based on forecast and demand happening, having all the replenishment signals go to Flash without us having to mess with it. And that can be, maybe 80% of the volume, 90% of the volume. So we didn't have to worry about the day-to-day. We could focus on the exceptions that had country-related issues with border closures, specific SKUs that had product constraints, and we could solve for those, or at least discuss those and try and find solutions for those more easily without having to maintain the day-to-day and then slip in the exceptions.
Thank you. So I know there's a couple other questions here, but I do want to make sure we get through the material. So I appreciate you taking that one, Jonathan. So moving along a little bit here. So another poll question. I'll read it here, and then we can put it up and give you guys a few seconds to weigh in. But in what ways has COVID-19 pandemic caused you to reevaluate your supply chain strategies? Oops, sorry. Thank you, Kate. So the poll's live. Answers are pouring in. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So leading the pack here is increased communication with partners and internal support. Certainly resonates with a lot of what we've talked about and what we experienced on all sides of the panelist table here. So thank you very much for that. Okay, moving along. So this is kind of coming into the end of this, wrapping it up a little bit. But what post-COVID-19 recommendations would you make for companies who have or are evaluating integrating spare parts management with planning systems? So Jonathan with Palo Alto Networks, can you take us into this one, please?
Yeah, I guess I could put it simply and say you should do it. Whether it's, I won't dictate which one, but we will move from spreadsheets early on to Baxter, I said 7 years or so ago. And what I've found with both the Baxter investment and other planning tool investments that we use for like S&OP is that you really need to get them in place, ideally, find the money for them early on and not wait for the problems to be there and then you're trying to plug it in after the fact. But it can save you so much time and money with a little bit of investment up front. You can save headcount through the automation that's in place with a tool like Baxter. The planning is a service, and I have one spares parts planner that's managing our entire global depot network on planning, and including projects with Baxter, NPI, EOL, refreshes, all those different things done with one person because of the daily activity we get out of Baxter. So we haven't had to go add a lot of headcount. So if you really balance what's a loaded headcount versus investment in a tool and how that allows you to scale versus just continually adding people, every couple of years or so, that's been a massive impact for us. And integrating the planning solutions. We don't necessarily plan all of our activity for demand and everything else in Baxter, but we were able to pull data out and look at those things side by side because we have them in systems and we don't have to go try and find a spreadsheet and double check the calculations and everything else. So that's been very nice.
Very good. So Philip, coming in from the Baxter side.
Yeah, I like what Jonathan said, but what I'd add to that is, we often hear apprehension to adopting a planning solution due to concerns over data quality. And to that, I would say you are not alone. Nobody has perfect data. And when we were doing some of the prep for this webinar, I think I even got Palo Alto to admit that when they got started with us, they didn't have great data quality either. But planning solution can actually help you with that. We have capabilities for monitoring the data for anomalies as part of our integration process. Additionally, we've got reporting capabilities that will actually do root cause analysis automatically as part of the system on every service miss that occurs, so that when a service miss happens, you can actually go fix the root cause of why. Examples of that could be there's missing install-based data. So there was a demand in Houston and the system didn't even know that you had a service contract in Houston. A planning tool should alert you to those types of events. Or if a bill of materials is missing some specific service part that the system was aware of, we will alert that so that we can drive that continuous improvement process for you. So the best way to get started on addressing those data quality issues is deploying a solution that's going to help you to get better over time. You won't be perfect at go live, but you will be better with every passing month and year, just like Palo Alto Networks has been able to do.
And Ryan,
So actually, yeah, go ahead.
but I absolutely agree with what Philip just said. And we were not perfect when we got started, but having the ability for Baxter to help us focus on the data, our install-based data, for example, has gotten incrementally better because we could easily see now certain customers that maybe were having like a lot of null location values. We could find those easily in the reporting because it would spit an error out, and we could go back to our sales teams or our technical account teams and have them go back to the customers and engage them to go get that data fixed on their end and fed into the system, so we weren't having to go try and backtrack it. And the hits and misses, that KPI in Baxter, and what Philip just mentioned about being able to readily see as it happens what the root cause was and address those, and that's allowed us to keep our service level so high because we can go address more systemic type issues and strategic decisions about how we want to go stock certain SKUs, certain regions, and make sure we're doing the right things to support the customers and keep those service levels up.
So we actually have a couple of questions. You can kind of finish this, but I just want to throw, we do have a couple questions specifically related to some of this in Baxter. So Philip, go ahead, I cut you off.
Oh, that was John. I was jumping in there.
Oh, sorry, John.
That's fine. I think what we learned or we really knew, and it's been reinforced, is the ability to be agile is really key. If you're planning on a spreadsheet or an offline database with periodic data dumps, that makes agility extremely hard. Philip was just talking about, and Jonathan too, about a lot of the concerns we hear have to do with data quality. Do we have the right data we need to drive a spares planning solution? Is it complete? Is it accurate? My thought on that is, if the data that you have has faults, that's still the data that you're using today. And if you're using that data in a suboptimal environment as well, it's too static and it's too manual to plan globally, especially in a very dynamic environment. So the answer, as we've said, is don't wait and get on a path to improvement. If your house is on fire, don't tidy up the kitchen before you call the fire department. Get the help on the way. Start with optimizing your plan and the process for developing that plan, and use the data that you have. And then with the right tool, those data issues can be automatically highlighted, prioritized, and resources that were previously bogged down in the mundane spreadsheets and things like that. Those resources, along with some targeted and guided help, can start to focus on more strategic activities such as that data improvement.
So I'd like to jump in here. There's like I said, Kate, can you feed us one of the questions that's Baxter related, please?
Yes. So we have one from Oscar. Can sellout data be analyzed in the Baxter environment as well?
What kind of data? I didn't catch that.
It says sellout.
Oscar, maybe you can provide a little follow-up and clarification on that, and we can get back to you to see if we can make sure we answer that correctly. Kate, you mentioned
Oscar says INV from customers, sales, pace, etc. I don't know if that helps.
We might have to follow up on that one individually, get a little bit more dialogue there. So Oscar, I promise we'll get back to you. Kate, there was another one.
Sure. This one's from Sean. We are seeing drastic downturn is in some business segments and spikes in others due to COVID. How is Baxter able to help short and long term to forecast demand without driving too much inventory?
So I'll take a shot at that. So forecasting demand specifically for service parts, you can take a lot of different approaches to that. One of the things is just using history as a basis for generating forward-looking forecast. If you can augment that with install-based planning, then that can give you an even better forecast, because then you can start to look at failure rates and that sort of thing, and that can drive your forecast. So if those different things are going up and down, your forecast goes up and down, your target stock levels go up and down more dynamically. One of the things that we've done in some cases is it can be as simple as shorten the historical window that you're using to of historical demand, for example, to create your forward-looking forecast, and that can make your forecast more reactive, and that can help as well. And then the other piece of that is just monitoring it. You know, watching for those dips, or having a tool that can watch for those dips and alert you when your forecast based compared to your history starts to go outside of your prescribed parameters, and you know, just be on top of that stuff. I hope that came close to addressing the question.
Thank you, John. So moving on a little bit here, Mark, as it relates to the question here, what say you?
Yeah, so, I mean, post-COVID-19, I'll say this is probably less about planning. Let me touch on planning real quick. Our customers that use a planning system, it appeared as though they were running smooth. Yeah, they were very communicative with us and looking for guidance from us, but day-to-day operationally wise, it seemed like they weren't missing a beat, right? They were just executing as they normally did. There was probably a lot of activity going on behind the scenes to make the adjustments, pulling levers and such inside the Baxter tool. But at the end of the day, they appeared to be just almost business as usual. Customers that don't use a planning system, that using, you know, the spreadsheet or some manual methodology, those customers really, really struggled and they trailed. And so much more communication, much more what if, and it just appeared as though they had trouble making decisions, and when they did, they were late, and they couldn't typically catch up without throwing some inventory at some of the areas of the world where they were experiencing some challenges. Recommendation just in general, you know, we talked about communication earlier. I'd encourage every company out there, communicate with your partners, both internal and external, whether you set up a regular schedule thing or a quarterly review. And maybe it might make sense in some cases, bring in multiple partners, because some of the challenges that you see are far-reaching. Some of the challenges that your partners incur are far-reaching. And if you have these meetings in silos, you're not really getting the power of your partnerships that are out there. So we communicate with our partners all the time. They've been tremendous throughout this pandemic, and we've been partnering with, obviously, with our customers as well. And we're keeping those lines of communication out there as frequently as necessary.
Mark, so really, this concludes our material. I think one of the bigger takeaways, right, was this was a unforeseen wake-up call in so many ways, right? There are just about every supply chain was challenged, and specifically looking at spare parts, logistics, service supply chain, planning involved, all of us, you know, on this call, and then panelists were right in the middle of it. So to hear some of the things that went really well, some of the things that we learned, very interesting. Hopefully everyone on the call took away a few nuggets. And again, we're very open. If you guys want to submit some questions, we're happy to answer them here. We have a few minutes left, so if there's any we can get to, excellent. If not, we'll of course make ourselves open for other dialogue, you know, down the road. But as we kind of wrap up, I really appreciate everybody's time who joined today, as well as the panelists. Great information, really interesting to see how everybody tackled this. And I really hope everyone has a wonderful day. Again, we'll sit here for a couple minutes as we have some time to see if any other questions come in. And again, we will respond to any that we didn't get to during the previous sections, you know, in an email from the corresponding company that makes sense for it. So as we do have a few minutes, gentlemen, any other parting words here for us today before we break?
I saw a couple of follow-ups to clarify what Oscar was asking about.
Okay, great.
About sellout data, and so I wanted to share the short answer to that is yeah. So if we're talking about just sales data as opposed to service demand, then absolutely, you know, the tool can handle, our tool specifically can handle multiple demand streams, which and can handle them separately, which often can be beneficial, because if you've got service demand and you've got sales demand, they may have very different demand patterns and require different forecast methods, for example. So That was the longer answer, but the shorter answer is yes, we can handle that.
Thank you, John. Well, great. Well, as we wrap, just keep in mind that this is going to be a series. Much more content coming from the Baxter and Flash side of things. So keep an eye out for emails from either Baxter or Flash to stay in tune for what's coming up. Again, recordings will be shared with you guys. The material will be shared, and we're always open if you have anything else. So, Kate, did I see one more come in? Just want to make sure we squeeze as many as possible in here.
No, Brian, what came in was Oscar simply saying thank you for answering.
Oh, great. You're very welcome, Oscar. Glad it worked out. Great. We're going to end. Thank you so much for being here, and we really look forward to seeing you on the next one. Have a great day.